everybody, it's Jay Roby. We're going to take a look at the dragon variation of the Sicilian defense in this video, in particularly the Yugoslav attack with some sidelines. I'm going to have to break the dragon variation of the defense down into a few videos because there's so much theory on it, just like all of the Sicilian lines, and I want to provide as rounded of an introduction as possible to the opening defense. So we're going to focus on the Yugoslav attack in this video with the Soltis line, along with some sidelines created from modern study, as well as some of the historical plays in the opening defense. And in the next video I put up on this series, I'm going to explore other options within the dragon variation of the Sicilian. Now, I want to preface things by saying that some people have told my viewers that a person shouldn't really get into the Sicilian defense due to the amazing amounts of theory on the opening. And I'm going to disagree for one reason. If you have a preferred opening that has such an astounding amount of theory available, you're only going to have the benefit of tons of top-level chess games to learn from in your opening of choice. The best in chess over many decades have used the Sicilian defense to great effect. Players like Bobby Fischer, Garry Kasparov, Anatoly Karpov, Magnus Carlsen, and many more top-rated grandmasters of chess have played the Sicilian defense and dragon variation many times, and a number of them have been world chess champions. And even though there is so much theory, the opening isn't solved. On the contrary, all of the lines, even up to today with our supercomputers, create aggressive razor-sharp positions that can be lost with the slightest positional mistake. So if you want to sharpen your positional understanding, your tactical awareness, and your overall skill in the game of chess, studying all that the Sicilian defense has to offer, even if you don't play it as black, can only greatly improve your abilities in chess. So let's get started. Now, the Sicilian defense begins when black plays an immediate push to c5 after white plays pawn to e4. This move by black stakes out control of d4, which is a key central square. And in chess, when a person refers to the center, it's not the exact center point of the board, but rather the immediate squares around it. Now, Nimzowitsch called these squares the most restricted group of squares around the central point. And of course, we're talking about e4, d4, e5, and d5. Now, by playing the pawn to c5, black prevents white from using the d and e pawns together to gain a strong center early in the game. Now, from this position, white's most common move is to develop with knight to f3. And in this video, we're going to continue on with the open Sicilian study, so black is going to play pawn to d6. Now, we will explore other options in future videos in this series, such as knight to c6 and pawn to e6, but for now we're going to focus on the open Sicilian lines. So after black plays pawn to d6, the most common reply from white is to push the pawn up now to d4. White plays d4 to secure space and to open up lines for the bishop. And it's basically just giving up the right to have one of its center pawns in return for that space in the open lines. Black captures, and by doing so gains a semi-open c-file. And in many Sicilian games, black shoots for queenside activity, so this is an important consideration. Black also maintains its center pawns by trading off its c-pawns for white's central d-pawn. So that's another important consideration moving forward in the line. So from this position here now, white is going to capture the pawn back with knight takes on d4, and black is going to develop its knight now to f6, attacking white's pawn on e4 in the process. From here now, white is going to defend that pawn by playing his knight out now to c3, and we're at a crucial junction in the Sicilian defense. Black has four main options in this position, like we discussed in the last video. We have the Najdorf pawn to a6, we have the classical knight to c6, we also have the Scheveningen pawn to e6, and we have the dragon, which is the focus of this video, by pushing the pawn up now to g6. So those are the four big options. There are some other options that black has from this position. We'll take a look at those in future videos, but for now we're going to play g6. Now, this ushers in the dragon variation of the Sicilian defense. Statistically speaking, white wins 43% of the time, and black's draw and win percentage total 57%. So it's a very solid defensive strategy from black. Now, we're going to take a look at the strongest line currently against the dragon Sicilian, and that's a Yugoslav attack. So from this position, white's going to develop its bishop up now to e3. So this is giving the knight on d4 another defender. So the bishop is defending it, plus the queen is defending it, and it's maintaining its presence along this dark square diagonal, carving towards black's king side. From this position, the best move to play for black is simply to fianchetto its own bishop here onto g7, giving it access along this nice long dark square diagonal. But if we flip back a move, if black tries to get a little overly aggressive by playing something like knight to g4, trying to trade off this dark square bishop too early, it's going to be in for a world of hurt, because now white can simply hit the check now on b5, and once that check is blocked, the queen just munches up the knight on g4, and black is down a piece in the opening. In fact, it doesn't even really matter what black blocks the check. check with. For example, black can try knight to d7, the knight still falls. Alternatively, black can try something like knight to c6, but now the knight on d4 just smashes into the position, taking on c6. Once the pawn recaptures, check, forking the rook and the king. When that check is blocked, there goes the rook on a8. So it's just a nasty position. So the best move after white develops the bishop to e3 is simply for black to go ahead and fianchetto its own bishop along that dark square diagonal. Now from this position, white's going to push his pawn up now to f3. And this is a really good move because it's defending the pawn here on e4, but it's also taking away that jump point in the future for black's knight to ever access g4. So it's a very good move. From here now, black's going to play knight to c6. This is pressurizing the d4 square. It's attacking the knight on d4, but of course we have other good jump points available for the knight, for example up to b4 or up to e5, for example. From this position, white's going to play its queen up now to d2, so it's basically supporting this bishop along this dark square diagonal. And from here now, black is going to castle, and white is going to play bishop up now to c4. This is ushering in the Soltis line, one of the most complicated and dynamic lines played by white against the dragon variation. So from this position here, black is going to bring its own bishop up now to d7. White's going to castle long, and black is going to bring its rook up now to c8 to start to gain some influence along this c-file. Now, we should probably talk a little bit about opposite side castling. Generally speaking, when you have opposite castling taking place in the game, it's going to be a wild game. And, you know, this is no different. There's a lot of theory on the Soltis line in the Yugoslav attack, but generally speaking, it's so razor sharp that if you make any kind of slight positional mistake, you're just going to get ripped apart and you're going to lose quite quickly. And that often happens when you have castling taking place on opposite sides of the board. The game is going to be sharp, it's going to be very aggressive, it's going to be dangerous waters. So you know, the play that's going to follow is going to definitely be interesting. So from here now, white's going to retreat the bishop back now to b3, basically keeping its influence along this light square diagonal, pointing towards the black king, and of course taking the bishop away from a square that it could be harassed and threatened with later. So from this position, black is going to play its knight up now to e5. And now we can see another benefit of having the bishop tucked away here on b3, because it's kind of preventing the knight from coming to c4 unhindered. If black was able to get the knight there without an attacker attacking it, it'll be able to trade off the dark square bishop relatively easily. But because the bishop is sitting here on b3, that's not really an option. So from this position now, white's going to begin to thrust its pawn towards the castle position of black. And this is very characteristic of any kind of white attack against the dragon variation. So what is black's reply to this? Because the attack on the castle position is coming. You know, what can black do to alleviate that and defend against that? Well, probably the best move for black to play in this position is pawn to h5, basically creating a blockade of that h pawn. Now, from here, white can play something like bishop to g5, and white definitely has chances, but one small slip up and it's game over. And pretty much all variations of the dragon are razor sharp, leaving virtually no room for even the smallest positional miscalculation. Now that both sides have castled on opposite sides of the board, you know, an all-out war is going to take place, and when the dust settles, only skill and wit will have crowned the winner or acknowledged the draw. So, you know, it's going to be a good game from this point. Now, if we go back to h4, another try for black is to play something like knight to c4. So black, of course, wants to get rid of that dark square bishop. White doesn't want to let that happen, so white's going to take that, and black is going to recapture with the rook. Now, from here now, white can continue on with the castle attack by pushing the pawn up to h5. Black can take that pawn, but from here now, white can attack the knight, kicking it back now to f6, and from here, white can play knight up to e2. Black can bring the rook over now to e8, and white is going to play bishop up to h6. Now, of course, black doesn't want to capture the bishop because that's going to bring the queen down, so from here, black is going to pull the bishop back now to h8. So one of the reasons why the rook was moved to e8 was to get it off of that f8 square so that black could do this. Now, this is still very much a fairly equal position, but white has much better chances in this position. For example, if we take a look at the coordination of white's pieces, of course, we've got connected rooks here. We have the bishop being supported by the queen along this dark square diagonal. The knights are protecting each other and can jump into the action relatively easily. And you might be asking yourself, well, white's down a pawn, but it's not going to last for very long. For example, play could continue as follows. White can push e5, and now black can take with the knight actually on g4, because once white recaptures captures, black can snag up the pawn here on e5, and the material balance is technically equal. White has two of black's minor pieces, black has the bishop and 3 pawns worth of material. But once again, if we look back towards the coordination of white's pieces, chances are going to slightly favor white in this position. But you know what? Black isn't dead in the water here by any stretch of the imagination either, because it's still going to be a fighting game, because black can try to mount up its own attack by getting its bishop pair to work in conjunction with the rooks and the queen. And it has to be said that black still has a couple of queenside pawns, which will allow for initiative against the castle position of white. However, as it stands, white is already coordinated pretty nicely in terms of piece placement like we talked about, so white does enjoy slightly better chances from this position. But I want to change gears now, though, and go back to the end of move 8 when black played knight to c6, because you might see as a black player a different strategy from white moving forward. So before we looked at the bishop coming down to c4 and then tucking itself into b3, but white also has another move which is an early castle instead. And modern study has begun to show that white can save time by castling long earlier in the line. So as a dragon player, you might see this line on occasion. From here you can simply play pawn up to d5, white can capture and you can recapture with your knight. White will come down and take the knight on c6, you can recapture with your pawn, and then white might try something like bishop to d4. This is all very cutting edge stuff, so there's a lot of theory on this, but generally speaking, it's definitely a playable position for both sides. And once again, the position is prone to, if there's any mistakes made, someone's definitely going to suffer for that. Now I want to go back to knight to c6 again, because there's another strategy that you might see white try to employ if you're using the dragon against them, and that's pawn to g4. So white's going to try to initiate some kingside attacks early on without castling right off the bat. As it turns out, this is fairly fine for black to work with. For example, play can continue as follows. Black can play bishop up now to e6, white can castle, black can capture the knight here on d4, and when white recaptures, black can play queen up to a5. White could continue pushing the pawn up now to a3 to prevent any kind of sacrificial attacks there on a2. Black can swing the rook over now to c8, doubling up on that knight on c3, and from here white can push the pawn up now to h4. Now there's no reason for black to panic in this position. Surely the pawns are coming down, but black has some resources. For example, black can play rook over to b8. And if we take a look, black is basically coordinating his pieces in quite a deadly manner, all pointing down towards the enemy king here. Now white can continue pressing the attack on black's castle position, but black can return the favor in kind by thrusting the b pawn forward now to b5. If white captures, black can recapture, and from here now white can actually attack the knight sitting on f6, but that's okay for black because black can do the same by pushing the b pawn up now to b4, attacking white's knight. If white takes the knight, black can capture the knight, but the fundamental difference in this position is that the queen is being attacked currently by black's pawn, and only a bishop is being attacked by white's pawn. So white has to do something about that. So white's going to take that pawn, but in this position now black can simply capture the bishop with the rook. And the reason is, of course, is that this rook cannot be taken by the pawn because that would be checkmate. For example, if the pawn were to take the rook, queen just sweeps in here to a3 and delivers a checkmate, and it's game over. So instead, white has to actually capture the rook with the queen, at which point black can get the queens off of the table. When that happens, black can snag up the pawn on f6. And even though black is down a couple pawns worth of material in this exact position here, it's going to be able to mop up some of these loose pawns very quickly. In fact, the engine score of this position is pretty much dead equal. And that makes sense because right off the bat, black is threatening bishop to g5, which would be a horrible move for white to have to meet. So white is going to have to play pawn up to f4 on its next move, at which point the c3 pawn drops, and black's going to get some of those other loose pawns relatively quickly, and the position is going to be equalized, and it's going to be a good fighting game for both sides. So if you do see an early g4 from white before white castles, and you're familiar with the lines that follow, you should be able to gain equality fairly handedly with the black pieces. Now before I move on, I just want to make a quick note about delaying your castling in the dragon variation. From all the lines that I've looked at, if you delay your castle, so in other words, if you don't castle kind of where the book moves have black castling, pretty much all of the lines favor white. So you're definitely going to want to make sure you get your castle off. And but let's take a break here from looking at the lines, and let's make a transition now to taking a look at a game that took place in 1995. So I'm just going to reset the board here, and we're going to take a look at a game that took place between Kasparov and Anand. And Anand had the white pieces, and he's going to use the Yugoslav attack against Kasparov. And the reasons why I chose this game, first of all, a couple people brought it up in the comments section in my last video, but also because it's just such a great example of how quickly things can turn bad in these lines. So let's just get right into the game here. So Anand opens up with pawn to e4, and Kasparov plays the Sicilian defense pawn to c5. Anand continues now knight to f3, and I'm just going to flip through the first sequence of moves here because it's pretty much the standard line that we were taking a look at in the open Sicilian. So we get into this position here where Kasparov basically says, let's do this dragon style. And Anand's reply, of course, was getting into the Yugoslav attack. So he plays bishop up to e3, and now Kasparov fianchettos his bishop onto g7. And at this point in the game, Anand played queen to d2, so he's changing the move order up a little bit. In fact, this is a little bit weaker for white compared to the more solid pawn to f3 in that position, because if you remember back in the video, pawn to f3 isn't only defending the pawn here on e4, but it's also taking away this jump point from the knight sitting on f6. So it's a little bit better of a move. Now, nonetheless, Anand played queen to d2, and in reply, Kasparov played knight to c6. But if we flip back a move, he actually could have taken advantage of the fact that he can play his knight up now to g4, because now it's attacking the dark square bishop. So instead of getting rid of the dark square bishop right away, white would like to try to keep that on the board, because, you know, black is going to castle on its king side, and having this dark square diagonal under your firm control is definitely a benefit for white. So white's going to try to keep this bishop. White could try something like bishop to g5, but here black can just play pawn up to h6, kicking the bishop back, which of course lets black just pounce all over it now with the knight taking here on e3, and then once that knight recaptures, black is actually already equalized in this position and can probably work towards getting a slight positional advantage as the game goes on. But nonetheless, Kasparov played knight to c6, which is also a solid move in the position. From here, Anand did play now f3, so he is taking away that g4 jump point from the knight. Play continues now, black castles, and now white brings the bishop up now to c4. So we're getting into the Soltis line. From here, Kasparov brings his bishop up now to d7, and Anand replies by thrusting his pawn now to h4. Kasparov simply blunts that, though, and plays his pawn up to h5. From here, Anand plays bishop back to b3, so you'll remember this in our discussions about the knight coming up to e5 in this position, and this bishop being able to capture it if it tries to snuggle in here on c4. So from this position, Kasparov swings his rook over now to c8, and Anand plays knight captures knight on c6. Now here, Kasparov decided to capture with the pawn, so he has a very solid pawn structure here, and in the process, he's leaving the a7 pawn hanging, but Anand doesn't fall for that, because if Anand comes in and captures that pawn, he ends up trapping his own bishop. And the play that follows definitely favors black, especially once the queens come off the table and some of the pieces are liquidated. And so Kasparov definitely would have been able to take advantage of that. So instead of playing that, Anand decided to play bishop to h6, attacking the dark square bishop of Kasparov's here on g7. Kasparov, instead of worrying about that for the short term, decides to play his pawn up now to c5, and from here, Anand swings his bishop now to c4 to allow the bishop to maintain along both of these light square diagonals. From here now, Kasparov swings his queen up now to b6, attacking the undefended pawn on b2, and now Anand decides to trade off the dark square bishops, and after black recaptures, he plays his pawn up now to b3. From here now, Kasparov swings his bishop up now to e6, attacking the light square bishop here, and from here, Anand decides to bring his knight down, attacking the queen, so Kasparov obviously has to capture that. He captures with the bishop, Anand recaptures, and then from this position, Kasparov thrusts his pawn forward now to e5. And this was a critical moment in the game. In fact, this is where the first major mistake takes place. Now, on the surface, it looks fine to go ahead and capture this pawn en passant, and that's exactly what Anand played. And Kasparov continued on with the attack now, pushing his pawn up to d5. Now, if this pawn is taken, unfortunately for white, the position just becomes really difficult to deal with, and there's going to be a lot of problems here. And in fact, black just has a very substantial advantage in this position. So instead of taking that, Anand decided to play bishop back to e2 once Kasparov played his pawn up to d5. Now from this position, even though Kasparov is looking at an enemy pawn perched on e6, he plays his pawn up now to c4, opening up this dark square diagonal, which is getting really close to the enemy king. And from this position, Anand pushes his pawn up to c3, and Kasparov continues now and swings his rook over to e8, so he's attacking this pawn. From here, Anand takes the pawn now on c4, Kasparov takes the pawn on e6, and now Anand plays his king over to f1.
1. And from this position, Kasparov just doesn't let up. He swings his rook over now to e8, and we have these doubled rooks just ripping down the e file, attacking that light square bishop on e2. So Anand has to save it. So he swings his bishop over to d3, and from here Kasparov comes up with a really nice move sequence. He takes a pawn on c4, and when Anand takes back, even though that bishop is attacking the rook on e6, Kasparov plays a beautiful tactic in this position, and he plays knight to e4. Now this move by the knight is doing a number of things. First of all, it's threatening checkmate if it were to jump to g3. Secondly, it's attacking the queen on d2. And there's a whole bunch of problems with this position that white has to face. And the best that white could do in this position would be to offer up the queen trade by swinging the queen down to d4. And when black captures and white recaptures, black can play the very nice move, knight check here on d2, king goes to safety, and the bishop falls on c4. So there's nothing good about that at all. So if we go back to this position, does white have any other options? Well, white could try to save the queen by going to c2, but then it's just checkmate and it's game over. So that's no good. White could also try to capture the knight, but after the rook lands a check on f6, white is going to be in a world of hurt, and there's nothing that's going to be able to do to stop substantial material loss, and in some lines even just losing the queen outright for a rook. So that's not a good option at all. So in fact, facing the position, Anand resigned and Kasparov won. Now, there were some other lines I could have got into with the game, but I wanted to kind of focus on the main points that tied into what we were talking about. Also, I think it's just a really good example of how fast things can go wrong in the Sicilian Dragon if you make a positional mistake. Like if we go back to where Kasparov pushed the pawn up to e5, Anand could have saved the position simply by castling, and the game is pretty much dead on equal from this point, so there's still a lot of chess to be played. But unfortunately, he took the pawn en passant, allowed Kasparov to get some tactical moves in, and then ended up losing the game and having to resign in this position here that we took a look at. And interesting enough, I don't know if you noticed as you're looking through the game with me, but Anand never castled in this game. So it was a very interesting game, and I think the Sicilian Dragon is a very interesting opening. And like I said at the beginning, some people say don't bother studying it too much because there's so much theory on it, but you're going to have so many awesome games to look at that are tactically rich, played by the best that chess has ever seen, and your chess is going to improve as a result of that, even if you don't play the Sicilian defense. So it's just a win-win situation all around. So anyway, that's the Dragon variation Yugoslav attack with some sidelines and modern improvements, but our work with the Dragon isn't over yet. I have a few more variations that I'll be exploring in the next few videos in this series, such as the accelerated Dragon, to name one. After that's done, we'll move on to the other primary variations in the open Sicilian, such as the classical Scheveningen and the Najdorf, along with some sidelines. So take care, hope you enjoy the video, and we'll see you next time.